Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the debt ceiling. This is a topic that you may have heard in the news recently. They're not talking about it too much at the moment, but it will become more and more pressing in the next month or two. It's a topic that if you were to search the internet right now and type in something like the debt ceiling, you'll find a lot of scary phrases like financial Armageddon or the end of the economy as we know it. And it's a lot of scaremongering, but it also has a little bit of truth to it. There is a real potential that this debt ceiling issue we're about to face could be financially catastrophic for the United States. We're going to talk about all of that. The goal today is to explain what the debt ceiling is, what's its use, what it's there for, the theory around it, and then we're going to talk about, in my opinion, what should be done with the debt ceiling moving forward. I think it's important that we first start. We're going to define some terms here. So we're going to talk about the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is, in Congress, it's the maximum amount of money that the federal government is allowed to borrow. The idea behind the creation of the debt ceiling was that the government should not be able to endlessly borrow money, that politicians and the federal government should be treated like a citizen, and that it should be fiscally responsible. You can't just borrow money endlessly. For example, I can't go to the bank and get a loan, and then the next year I go back and I get a bigger loan, and the year after that a bigger loan without ever paying off my loan. I just never pay off my loans. I just continually borrow money and get bigger and bigger and bigger loans. The same should be of the government. The government can't just borrow endlessly, and the debt ceiling was created in order to sort of keep the reckless spending in check. Does it work? Does the debt ceiling actually do that? No, not really. Other countries don't have this problem, by the way. They don't have a debt ceiling. This is uniquely American. Other countries just spend the money that they decide to spend. They just borrow and borrow and borrow and spend. If they pass a bill that says we're going to spend X amount of dollars, they'll spend X amount of dollars. In the United States, you pass a bill that says we're going to spend X amount of dollars. You don't have X amount of dollars. Well, you have to raise the debt ceiling. And instead of keeping our spending in check, all we do is raise the debt ceiling repeatedly. We do this over and over and over and over again. So it doesn't really work the way it was designed to. We have these showdowns every once in a while, and the showdowns never really accomplish anything. I don't know if people remember, there was a 2-week government shutdown back in 2013, and it didn't really do anything. They had to close the federal parks. They said, oh, you can't come to the federal park. It's a wide open land. But they shut it down just so people would actually feel what happens when the federal government shuts down, because it turns out not a lot is felt. So they had to artificially close the federal parks just because they wanted people to feel like something bad was happening. And all that the showdown wound up accomplishing was lowering the United States bond rating from AAA to AA+, which, not great. The argument goes that if the U.S. doesn't keep raising the debt limit, we're going to default on our debt. And then this knock to the U.S. economy could result in the quote-unquote financial Armageddon that people have been talking to. So if we don't keep raising the debt ceiling, if we run out of money, we're going to lose our status or the gold status, the AAA status in the United States, and then that'll be catastrophic. And there's some truth to that. But the other argument should be that we just should stop spending so much money that we need to continually raise the debt ceiling. But that seems to get lost in the mix. The U.S. we were set to reach the debt limit on the 19th of January. And you had to watch out because the terrible Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she wrote to Kevin McCarthy, the new House Speaker, saying that the House needs to act to raise the debt limit because time is so limited. And anything that Janet Yellen says should be taken with a grain of salt, because this is the same woman who sat up there as a Treasury Secretary and told us that inflation was never going to be an issue. It's going to be transitory is what she said, that it was not going to last. And she turns out to have been 100% wrong. Inflation is the biggest problem right now in the economy. So I don't really care what Janet Yellen has to say. She's not very good at her job and doesn't seem to ever be predicting the correct things. But she might be a little bit correct that the debt ceiling showdown here could be different and could result in a financial catastrophe. So some of the problems we have encountered when approaching the debt ceiling are the fact that both inflation and interest rates rose faster than expected last year. And new policies like student loan forgiveness basically shortened our ability to prolong the spending of the federal government. So let's say we're going to use this to try and explain this in simple terms, because I'm realizing that this might not be making a lot of sense to some people who don't know this topic. So the federal government right now has 31 trillion with a T, $trillion in debt. Okay, we owe $31 trillion. The problem is that if we don't have enough money, if we don't have $31 trillion, imagine we have a giant wallet. The United States has a giant wallet. We have this giant wallet, but we only have $30 trillion. Or we actually need $32 trillion because maybe we have $31 trillion, but we need $32 trillion because it turns out that all the things that we have to spend money on, when we actually added it up, it's $32 trillion. We had a $31 trillion budget, let's say. We go to the grocery store, we have $31 trillion. We need to buy $31 trillion worth of groceries. And then we start getting all the things that we need, and when we check out, it turns out it's $32 trillion. That's basically what's happening right now. We've overspent the money that we have, and now we need more money. So if we don't have that $32 trillion, the federal government can use some accountant trickery to pay the bills that we have to continue to pay, so salaries and whatever else the federal government has to spend money on. Somehow they use some sort of kung fu wizardry, and they can prolong paying people what they need. So Janet Yellen has said that our ability to do that in this case is actually is not as good as it has been in the past, because we have spent so much money and we did things like student loan forgiveness, which made it so that now we actually have shortened the window. We cannot just prolong the debt ceiling like we would in the past to have a conversation about it. The debt ceiling was raised 1 year ago to $31.4 trillion. The GDP, the gross domestic product of the entire country of America, is $25 trillion. We now could spend every penny of every dollar generated in the United States for an entire year to the debt, and we wouldn't be able to pay it off. Every single person, 350 million people, could put every ounce of everything they have into the debt, and we can't pay it off. This means this is terrible. This is just a gigantic problem that people just pretend doesn't exist. Ross Perot was talking about this in the 90s, and he was exactly right. If you ever go back and read his book, which maybe I'll actually go back to the shelf here and pull up later and recommend, because it's actually a really good read, and it's still relevant 30 years later. So the yields were another problem. The yields on 10-year treasuries, which move opposite of prices, have gone up 4.25% in August, and it was gone up to 4.25% in August. It was 2.6% at the beginning of last year, and it was 1.5% at the beginning of the year, and 1.5% last year. So if we're raising interest rates on treasuries, so the United States has things that you can buy, right? You can buy bonds, you can buy treasuries, it's basically, you can think of it kind of like stock in the United States. And normally the interest rate on these things are low because someone will buy them. The demand is high because the United States is a good investment, and they can keep the interest rates low because people will buy them, and the United States pays out a little interest over time, and you make a little money on your thing, and you also fund the United States. It's kind of the way Treasury and bonds work. They have had to raise the interest rates up from 1.5% to 4.25%. So it used to be you buy, let's say I have $1 million, and I put $1 million in a U.S. Treasury, okay? Over a certain time period, they're going to guarantee, maybe over the course of a year or whatever, 2 years, 10 years, they're going to guarantee a certain interest rate. So let's simplify this a little bit. I have $100, okay? I spend $100 on a U.S. Treasury that's going to mature or a U.S. bond that's going to mature in a week, okay? So at the end of the week, they're going to pay me back at a 1% interest. So they'll give me $101. It's a small example, but imagine it for a second. So I made $1 over the course of the week, a 1% interest on my investment. But I knew for a fact that I was going to make that dollar back. they're going to pay me $101. They're going to give me my dollar back. Well, all of a sudden, I don't know if the United States is a good bet. So I don't want to buy that bond, that treasury. I don't want to invest in the United States. Well, what does the United States do? They need the money. But they have to incentivize people to buy. So they have to raise the interest rates on what they're selling, basically. They have to give a better deal to the consumer who's buying it. So we have gone up, what is that, 300%? 1.5 to 4.25, is that 300%? A little bit more? And we're saying, about 300%. You're saying, so we've gone up 300% interest the United States is paying out, which actually makes our debt problem worse, by the way. But no one's going to buy it otherwise. We can't fund the government. This is just another little piece of the puzzle. This is just another example of the United States economy being much more shaky than the Biden administration is currently wanting to acknowledge. No one's buying into the United States. No one wants to invest in the United States' future. The United States has not run a surplus. So we've not taken in more money than we've spent since 2001. This means we have borrowed money every year since 2001 to fund the government, every single year for the past 22 years. And people think that we can just spend money. We can just spend and borrow for eternity, this modern monetary theory, this idea that we can just print more money. We'll just spend more money, and it's not a big deal. But eventually the bill comes due. The sad fact is America cannot pay its bills. This is true. This is a problem. This is a gigantic problem. We don't actually have money to fund things. We have to cut spending. This is the solution. We keep talking about we need to raise the debt limit. No. We don't need to do that. We need to be cutting the deficit. We need to be reducing the debt limit. We can't pay these bills. And eventually, when the world realizes this, when it becomes very clear that we are living in a giant Ponzi scheme and it collapses, it's going to be devastating for everyone involved. You have to get ahead of this. You have to cut spending first. Now, one of the big problems is when you explain this problem to people and you say, hey, here's the problem. What's the solution? Or do you support the solution? Should we cut spending? People say, yes, absolutely. We should cut spending. That's a great idea. And then you say, well, what should we cut? And they have no answers. Because the sad fact is that the liabilities that we are required to pay out make up the most gigantic portion of the money that we spend. And let's do some numbers. Let's back this up with data. People are very, very quick to point to the military and defense budget and say, we need to cut this. But the fact is that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are the biggest liabilities on the book. And here are the numbers to back this up. The government expects to spend $6 trillion are expected to spend $6 trillion in 2022. More than 65% of that $6 trillion, so more than half, 65%, pays for the benefits of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So over half of all the money that we spend in the government funds those three things. Over half of it. Social Security, which is the biggest expense, is budgeted at $1.196 trillion, followed by Medicare at $766 billion and Medicaid at $571 billion. Military spending, which is included in the budget under discretionary spending, is the biggest expense. The expense for the military, the Department of Defense base budget, is estimated at $715 billion. Okay? It's expensive. But let's consider a couple things here. It's not nearly as expensive as Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid. Not nearly as expensive. It's more expensive than Medicaid. But combined with Medicare, Social Security, not anywhere close. The other thing, when people talk about it being inflated, there is a little bit of truth to this. We give contracts to weapons manufacturers that we don't need to be pursuing. But it's not as large as it seems. I used to be one of these people who said we needed to cut the military budget, and then you dig into it. You dig in, you dive a little bit, and you say, okay, there can be some cuts. But what is the difference when we add it up? We say, oh my gosh, we spend more than the next 10 countries combined in military spending. Okay, couple things. One, we are much larger. Two, the biggest expense for our military is actually the fact that we pay them. So other countries, they don't spend as much money because they don't actually pay their soldiers the way that we do. We pay our soldiers fairly decently. I'm not saying that a low-level private is making killer money. But what I'm saying is when you look on a whole, one of the biggest expense in our military is actually how we pay the military. It's not the contracting work and the defense stuff. It's not spending unnecessarily on tanks. It's not doing all this nonsense. But it actually is the fact that we pay soldiers a decent living wage. And that is a problem that would be really hard to fix in the military, especially because our military right now can't recruit to their standards and are already diminishing in some of the jobs that are necessary. You know, we can't get enough physicians who work in the military at this point. We don't know. We have problems in the military that go beyond the budget. But this is just a digression. The point is that the biggest problem in our budget is that we can't fund the programs that people like. People like Social Security. People like Medicare. People like Medicaid. The truth is you can't be a politician and be honest, because the fact is we have to cut those programs. We have to make cuts to them. Social Security especially. Social Security was a Ponzi scheme. It's a terrible system. Your grandma gets Social Security. She paid in next to nothing back in the 60s and 70s, and now she's getting money. And you say, that's fine. We should fund people who have paid in. We owe them because we took money out from them, but we can't fund that program going forward. I am 32. The idea that I'm going to get Social Security, I know is nonsense. They're taking money out of my check every 2 weeks. They're taking money from me to pay for Social Security. I don't want in that system, first of all, because I would be better off investing myself. I don't need the government to fund my retirement. I just don't. And I wish I could opt out of it because I know for a fact I'm not getting a Social Security check when I'm old. If you're in your 30s, maybe even your 40s, if you're in your 50s, maybe we'll get another 15, 16 years out of it. But it's going to drastically take an overhaul. We're going to have to figure out how, because you get Social Security at 65. People live to be 80-something now. It used to be that Social Security was given at 65. You died at 67. Okay? You didn't live for 30 years on Social Security. It just didn't work that way. So when you paid in a little bit of money, you took a little bit of money out. There you go, still in the big pot. Also, the government spent the money they weren't supposed to. Social Security was supposed to go into a piggy bank, and it was supposed to just sit there. And then the government said, oh, actually, we need that money, so let's just spend that money, and then we'll figure it out later. And that's what happened. But we also it's a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. We needed to have more people. We don't have enough people paying into Social Security because the birth rate dropped in the United States, so we can't fund this Ponzi scheme, this pyramid scheme that is Social Security. We don't know how to do it. And this is not to say we should take money away from people who earn Social Security. You paid in your whole life. They took money away from you investing in your future, and they did it for you, but they didn't really, but they said they did. So we owe you that money. My aunt's on Social Security. The idea that we should cut that, take her Social Security away, no, that's absurd. That's crazy. She paid in her whole life. Me, on the other hand, okay, I've worked for the last 14 years of my life full-time, so since I was 18, and you say, okay, well, then, okay, I'm going to have to eat that 14 years. I'm comfortable with that. If you're in, maybe you say, whatever, we'll figure out a grace period, but we need to stop this program. We need to. It is not, we can't fund it. Medicare and Medicaid, they also need reform. They need cuts. We need to figure this out, but we can't fund these programs. This is not to say, this has nothing to do with anything other than fiscal responsibility. You can't fund them. Explain to me how we make it work, because that's the problem that we don't know the answer to. If you can explain to me a problem, we can keep taxes the same. Okay, so I'm not going to have to pay more, and we can fund it. Explain it to me. Because the truth is, we're going to have to raise taxes substantially on the middle class to fund these programs. And that's the biggest problem with the debt ceiling. We owe all this money. We keep saying we'll spend more money. We're going to give student loan forgiveness, $500 billion. Do you understand how insane that is? When we can't pay for the things that people actually need. I don't have student loans. I went to college. I don't have student loans. I went to a community college. I got a 2-year degree because I knew what I wanted to do. I got an associate's in applied science. I wanted to be a firefighter. I wanted to be a paramedic. That's what I wanted to do. And I knew, it's not that I couldn't have gone to a 4-year school. I didn't need to. I didn't want to. It's not something I desired. I knew what I wanted to do, and I went and did that thing. Okay, there you go. That's great. Some people don't know. Some people go to school just because they think they should. I think what we should be doing, instead of funding student loan forgiveness, is making college more unnecessary. College for doctors, for engineers. Okay, makes sense. College so you can go what? Get a degree in sociology? So you can go work in an office? That's ridiculous. It's absurd. And we're going to spend money. We're going to throw money at a problem. We don't have money. We're recklessly spending. We're the guy with the maxed out credit cards going to the club and throwing $100 bills in the air. And everyone look, America, you're balling. No, we're not. We got no money. We got no money. All right? So the solution is cut spending. But it's a solution that's not going to ever happen. I don't know. You can't be a politician and get elected and say you want to cut Social Security. It's a political kryptonite. It just doesn't work that way. According to the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the debt ceiling has been raised, extended, or revised 78 times since 1960. This occurred 49 times under Republican presidents and 29 times under Democratic presidents. It's a problem both sides have. They just want to spend your money. They want to take your money, and they want to spend your money, and they want to do it on things that you might not even like. You might not even support. I don't support student loan forgiveness. Half the country doesn't support student loan forgiveness. It's a very partisan thing, and we're going to spend billions of dollars on it. My opinion is that the government should spend money on things that everyone likes, everyone agrees on. And I'm not saying everyone is in 100%. I mean everyone is in 80, 90%. Certainly not 50. If 50% of the country wants a thing, we shouldn't do that thing. We shouldn't force it down people's throats. But if 80%, then the federal government has a role. Say, oh, yeah. So people like the government, funding infrastructure, roads, bridges. That's fine. That's fine. That's the role of the government. Military spending. Everyone says we need to spend some money on the military. And everyone, again, 80 to 90%. But we don't have solutions in this country. We just put Band-Aids on problems and push forward. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. I hope you understand the debt ceiling a little bit and why it's kind of important. It's just this arbitrary thing that we choose to talk about every year and do nothing about. The idea was fiscal responsibility. It's not being met. We have a limit imposed, but if you can just ignore the limit, then it's not really a limit. So it's like having a law, but the punishment for the law is a fine. Well, then it's just a crime for poor people. That's what the debt ceiling is. It's a law, but it's a law that can be ignored, so it's not really a law. And no one wants to fix it. No one's trying to do anything. The Republicans have not been very clear on what they want. They say they want cuts to certain things, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it plays out. But if we hit the limit, if we actually default on our loans and we lose our bond status, this could be a big problem. And we have people in Congress right now who don't back down. So I don't know. I don't know if they will. I don't know what the future holds, but I hope that they don't. I hope that we can't really afford to default. I do support the Republican effort to try and cut spending. That's great. But I don't think defaulting is going to help anybody. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. As always, questions, comments, concerns. I love to hear them. Put them down there on the YouTube page or Facebook or wherever. Shoot me an email. Doesn't matter. I would love to answer any and all questions and concerns. As always, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you on the next episode.